The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast dome under artificial stars. 47 different species had their designated areas, each one carefully designed to accommodate their unique needs. The Zephyrians needed low gravity platforms, the Caraxians required humid air chambers, and the Vaxians sat in their crystalline pods that hummed with energy. But today, 3 simple chairs in Section 12 remained empty, and somehow that emptiness felt louder than all the voices combined. Council Speaker Velthar stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing in the traditional opening ceremony. His blue-scaled face showed concern as he looked toward the human section. 3 months had passed since anyone had seen Ambassador Kyung-ho, Dr. So-young, or Commander Jin-woo. The humans had simply stopped coming. "We gather today to address the matter of Earth's withdrawal from our council," Velthar announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation devices. The usual chatter died down. Even the most aggressive species seemed subdued. High Counselor Threshkal of the Caraxian Federation shifted in his environmental suit. His people were warriors by nature, but even he looked uncomfortable. "They gave no warning," he said through his translator. "One day they were here, the next day gone. No explanation beyond that ridiculous formal notice." The formal notice had been exactly 47 words long, polite, professional, and completely devastating. It thanked the Council for centuries of cooperation and announced Earth's immediate withdrawal from all agreements, treaties, and collaborative projects. No reasons given, no complaints listed, no demands made. Counselor Zenthara from the Nexari Collective raised one of her tentacles. "Perhaps we should examine why they left," she suggested, though her tone indicated she already suspected the answer would be uncomfortable. The silence that followed was telling. Everyone knew why, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Ambassador. Kyung-ho had been the human representative for 23 years. He was a small, quiet man who never raised his voice or demanded special treatment. When disputes arose between species, he would listen carefully to all sides and then suggest solutions that somehow satisfied everyone. His proposals were so reasonable that most counselors forgot they came from him at all. Dr. So-young had been even less visible. She worked in the Agricultural Research Division, developing crop strains that could grow in different atmospheric conditions. Her innovations had ended famine on 12 different worlds, but she never attended the recognition ceremonies. She was always too busy working on the next problem. Commander Jin-woo ran the peacekeeping operations from a small office that most counselors had never visited. Whenever tensions rose between species, conflicts somehow resolved themselves before they became serious. Border disputes turned into trade agreements, territorial claims became joint research projects, and potential wars faded into minor disagreements. The 3 humans had formed the backbone of galactic civilization for decades, and nobody had noticed. "The agricultural reports from the outer systems are concerning," admitted Counselor Vrak from the Mining Guild. His rock-like features showed unusual emotion. "Crop yields are down 30% across 7 worlds. The pest control systems are failing. The translation network has been experiencing errors," added Trade Minister Yiln. "Simple contracts are being misunderstood. We have had 6 trade disputes this week that should have been routine transactions. Border Patrol reports indicate increased tensions in the spiral arm sectors," said Defense Coordinator Zahn. 3 different flashpoints are developing simultaneously. Our usual mediation protocols are not working." Velthar looked around the chamber. The greatest minds of 47 species sat before him, yet they all seemed lost without 3 humans who had never asked for anything more than basic courtesy and a chance to help. The irony was bitter. Humans had been the newest members of the Council, joining only 2 centuries ago when they achieved faster-than-light travel. Most species had expected them to be like other young civilizations, demanding, aggressive, trying to prove themselves worthy of galactic attention. Instead, Humans had been almost apologetic about their presence. They contributed far more than they took, solved problems without being asked, and never complained when other species received credit for human innovations. They seemed genuinely happy just to be part of something larger than themselves. "We took them for granted," Velthar said quietly, though his words carried clearly through the chamber. "They asked for nothing and gave everything, and we treated their contributions as if they were natural laws, rather than gifts." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "So what do we do now?" asked Counselor Threshcall. The warrior's usual confidence was gone. "How do we function without them?" "We adapt," said Zenthara, though she did not sound convinced. "We learn to do things ourselves. We develop our own solutions." "With what?" countered Trade Minister Yiln. "Do you know how Jinwoo's early warning system works? Can you replicate So Young's crop modifications? Does anyone here understand Kyung-ho's mediation techniques well enough to teach them?" The answer was obvious from the silence. Humans had not just contributed to galactic civilization. They had become its invisible foundation. They handled the unglamorous work that kept everything running smoothly, the thankless tasks that prevented small problems from becoming major crises. "We should contact them," suggested Counselor Vrack. "Send a delegation to Earth. Negotiate their return." "With what leverage?" asked Velthar. "What do we offer a species that wants nothing from us? What do we threaten a people who have already walked away?" The question revealed the true scope of their problem. Humans had not left because they were angry or because they had been treated badly. They had left because they no longer saw value in staying. The Council offered them nothing they could not provide for themselves. Reports had been filtering in from the human territories. Earth and its colonies were thriving. Human technology was advancing at an unprecedented rate. Their society was stable and prosperous. They were doing better alone than they had ever done as part of the galactic community. "They are not just surviving without us," Velthar continued, reading from the intelligence reports. "They are flourishing. Their research has accelerated. Their colonies are expanding. Their people seem happier." The implication was clear and painful. Humans had been held back by their council membership, not helped by it. They had spent so much time and energy solving everyone else's problems that they had neglected their own potential. "What about the newer species?" asked Counselor Zenthara. "The ones approaching spaceflight capability? How do we bring them into the Council without human guidance?" That question sent a chill through the chamber. 3 civilizations were currently being evaluated for Council membership. Traditionally, humans handled first contact protocols. They had a gift for making new species feel welcome and valued. Without them, the Council's recruitment efforts had stalled. Worse, reports suggested that these new civilizations were studying galactic politics carefully before making decisions about contact. They saw the Council's current dysfunction and were choosing isolation instead of membership. "We are becoming irrelevant," Velthar said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Without humans to hold us together, we are reverting to what we were before. 47 different species pursuing our own interests with no common purpose." The session ended without any resolutions. Counselors filed out of the chamber in small groups, whispering among themselves. The empty human chairs remained, silent witnesses to the Council's decline. In his private office, Velthar stared out at the stars and wondered if this was how empires always ended, not with war or conquest, but with the quiet departure of those who had made them possible in the first place. 2 weeks after the emergency session, the first real crisis hit the Coraxian Federation like a plague. The agricultural worlds that fed their warrior culture began reporting massive crop failures across 3 star systems. Plants that had grown reliably for 30 years were dying in the fields, eaten by insects that seemed immune to every pesticide the Coraxians could develop. Federation leader Threshkal stood in his command center watching the reports flood in. Green worlds were turning brown as entire harvests withered. His military advisors, trained for conquest and battle, were helpless against an enemy they could not fight with weapons or strategy. "The bioadaptive strains are failing," reported Chief Scientist Kextar, his voice heavy with defeat. "Dr. So-Young's modifications that protected against pest evolution have stopped working. Without her continued research and updates, the insects are developing resistance faster than we can respond." Threshkal slammed his armored fist against the display table. "Contact the Sol system, offer whatever they want, money, territory, military protection. Whatever it takes to get her back." The response came back within hours, polite, professional, and absolutely final. "Thank you for your inquiry. We appreciate your past cooperation, but Earth no longer provides external consultation services. We wish you success in your endeavors." The message was signed by some low-level administrator, not even one of the former ambassadors. It was clear that humanity was not angry or playing games. They simply had no interest in returning to their old role as galactic problem solvers. Meanwhile, in the commercial districts of the Vaxian Trade Coalition, confusion reigned. Merchant vessels arrived at stations with cargo holds full of goods that nobody could properly identify. The universal translation algorithms that had made interspecies commerce possible were breaking down without regular updates and maintenance. Trademaster Yiln received increasingly frantic reports from across the Coalition's territory. A Draknari cargo ship had delivered what they thought were medical supplies to a Nexari colony, only to discover they were actually industrial lubricants. A Caraxian food shipment had been rejected by Zephyrian customs because the translation software had described nutritious grain as poisonous waste material. "How did this happen?" Yiln demanded of his technical staff. "These systems have worked perfectly for decades." Chief Programmer Vexil looked embarrassed as he explained. "The translation matrices were designed by human linguists. They required constant updating as languages evolved and new terms were added. We thought it was automatic, but apparently human technicians were manually reviewing and correcting the algorithms every few days." "Every few days?" Yiln's crystalline body flickered with disbelief. "For how long?" "According to the logs, for the past 47 years, since the day the system went online. The scope of human contribution was becoming clearer with each passing day, and it was staggering. They had not just participated in galactic civilization, they had been its silent administrators, the invisible hands that kept everything functioning smoothly. Commander Zahn of the Defense Coordination Center faced an even more immediate crisis. 3 separate border disputes were escalating simultaneously, and his forces seemed paralyzed without proper strategic guidance. The hegemony of vast stars was mobilizing fleet units near Draknari space, while the mining guild claimed exclusive rights to an asteroid field that the Nexari Collective considered their territory. "Where is the early warning data?" Zahn demanded of his intelligence staff. How did these conflicts develop without any advance notice? Intelligence Chief Raxon looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the early warning network was designed and operated by Commander Jin Wu. His office monitored communication patterns, trade fluctuations, and social indicators across all member territories. He would identify potential conflicts weeks before they became serious and quietly arrange preventive measures." "What kind of preventive measures?" "Trade incentives, cultural exchange programs, joint research projects, strategic resource sharing." He would create situations where cooperation was more profitable than conflict. Most species never realized they were being guided away from war. Zahn stared at the tactical displays showing military buildups across 3 sectors. "And now?" "Now we only learn about conflicts when shooting starts." The situation was deteriorating rapidly across all areas of galactic society. Medical centers were struggling without Dr. Heijin's treatment protocols, which had reduced cross-species disease transmission by 90%. Engineering projects were failing without Dr. Donghyun's structural designs, which had allowed different species to build compatible infrastructure. Most disturbing of all was the change in the council sessions themselves. Without Ambassador Kyung-ho's gentle guidance, debates were becoming arguments were becoming accusations, and accusations were threatening to become something much worse. During what should have been a routine budget discussion, Counselor Threshcall and Trade Master Yiln nearly came to blows over resource allocation. The Draknari delegation walked out when their territorial claims were questioned, and 3 smaller species formed a defensive alliance because they felt threatened by larger neighbors. "This is chaos," Velthar confided to his aide after a particularly hostile session. "We are behaving like children without adult supervision." His aide, a young Zephyrian named Kelmarsh, looked thoughtful. "Perhaps that is exactly what we are, sir. Perhaps the humans were the adults in the room, and we never realized it." The observation was more accurate than Velthar wanted to admit. Humans had somehow managed to make 47 different species work together despite fundamental differences in biology, psychology, and culture. They had done it so skillfully that their role had become invisible. Reports from neutral observers confirmed the worst fears. 3 promising civilizations that had been approaching spaceflight capability were now actively avoiding contact with the galactic community. They had studied the Council's recent behavior and decided that isolation was preferable to joining what appeared to be a dysfunctional political organization. "We are not just losing effectiveness," Velthar reported to the Emergency Leadership Committee. "We are losing legitimacy. New species look at us and see exactly what we have become, a collection of squabbling tribes with no common purpose or moral authority." The committee members sat in uncomfortable silence. Each species was beginning to focus on their own interests rather than collective goals. Old rivalries were resurfacing, ancient territorial disputes were being reopened, and the spirit of cooperation that had defined the golden age of galactic civilization was evaporating. "What about direct negotiation?" suggested Counselor Zenthara. "Send a delegation to Earth, not to demand their return, but to understand why they left." "We know why they left," replied Threshcall bitterly. "We took them for granted. We treated their gifts as obligations. We never acknowledged their contributions or showed them the respect they deserved." "Then we apologize," Zenthara continued. "We admit our mistakes and ask for forgiveness." "And then what?" asked Yilin. "They return to their old role as our unpaid problem solvers? Why would they accept that arrangement again when they have clearly found something better?" The question highlighted the true depth of their predicament. Humans had not left because they were mistreated. They had left because they had outgrown their role in galactic society. They no longer needed what the Council offered, and the Council desperately needed what they provided. Intelligence reports from human space painted a picture of unprecedented prosperity and advancement, free from the constant demands of maintaining galactic stability. Human scientists and engineers were making breakthrough discoveries at an accelerating pace. Their society was evolving rapidly, developing new forms of government and social organization that seemed far more advanced than anything the Council had achieved. "They are becoming something new," Velthar admitted to his private council. "Something beyond what any of our species have accomplished. While we remain trapped in old patterns of conflict and competition, they are transcending those limitations." The most painful realization was that humanity's withdrawal was not a temporary setback, but a permanent transformation. They had moved beyond the need for galactic politics and were charting their own course toward a future that the Council could barely comprehend. As Velthar stood alone in the empty council chamber after another failed session, he wondered if they were witnessing the end of an era. The galactic community that had seemed so stable and permanent was crumbling without the quiet humans who had held it together. Outside the great windows, the stars remained unchanged, but the civilization that had once united them was fracturing into smaller and smaller pieces each species retreating into isolation rather than facing the difficult work of cooperation without human guidance. The Calorian technocracy considered itself the most advanced engineering civilization in the galaxy. Their crystal-based technology could manipulate matter at the molecular level, and their computational abilities were legendary among all species. So, when they volunteered to reverse engineer the human water purification systems, everyone expected quick success. Chief Engineer Zalketh assembled the finest minds of his species in their most advanced laboratory. They had acquired several human purification units from abandoned installations and were confident they could understand and replicate the technology within weeks. 6 weeks later, Zalketh stood before a smoking pile of crystalline debris that had once been their prototype. His engineering team looked exhausted and defeated, their usual confidence shattered by repeated failures. "The principles seem simple enough," explained Senior Technician Mordal, her voice strained with frustration. "Water enters, contaminants are removed, clean water exits. But the actual process defies analysis." "How is that possible?" demanded Zalketh. "We have mapped every component, analyzed every material, traced every energy pathway. The physics should be straightforward." "That is exactly the problem, sir. The physics are too straightforward. Human engineering appears to violate our understanding of complexity theory. Their solutions are elegant beyond our comprehension." The Calorian team had discovered something that disturbed them deeply. Human technology was not just advanced, it was fundamentally different. Where Calorian engineering used complexity to achieve precision, human engineering used simplicity to achieve the impossible. Their best attempts had produced a water purification system that worked at 23% efficiency, required 40 times more energy than the human version, and cost more to manufacture than most starships. Worse, it broke down after 3 days of operation and could not be repaired without completely rebuilding it. "They think differently than we do," Mordal concluded. "Their approach to problem-solving follows patterns we cannot comprehend. We can copy their results, but we cannot understand their methods." Similar failures were occurring across the galaxy as different species attempted to replace human innovations. The Draknari Empire tried to recreate Commander Jinwu's peacekeeping protocols with disastrous results. Their first intervention in the Spiral Arm conflict turned a minor border dispute between two small species into a three-way war that was rapidly spreading to neighboring systems. General Vorthak of the Draknari military stood in his war room watching tactical displays that showed increasing chaos. His species were natural warriors, bred for combat and conquest, but they had no experience with the subtle art of preventing wars rather than winning them. The human files describe a process called preventive diplomacy, reported his intelligence officer, Major Kexarol. It involves identifying potential conflicts before they develop and creating conditions that make peaceful resolution more attractive than violence. "That makes no sense," Vorthak replied, his scarred features showing confusion. "How do you fight a war that has not started? How do you defeat an enemy that does not yet exist?" According to these records, Commander Jinwu did not fight or defeat anyone. He simply made it easier for species to cooperate than to fight. The concept was alien to Draknari thinking. Their entire culture was built around strength, honor, and victory. The idea of achieving goals without conflict was like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen light. Their attempts at peacekeeping had been catastrophic. Instead of de-escalating tensions, Draknari interventions had convinced all parties that war was inevitable and immediate military action was necessary for survival. Within days, a minor disagreement over mining rights had become a shooting war with multiple casualties and spreading violence. The Nexari Collective faced similar problems trying to replicate Dr. So-Young's agricultural innovations. Their best scientists understood the basic principles of genetic modification and crop development, but they could not achieve the same results. Research Director Yexathana reviewed the latest test results with growing despair. "We have successfully created plants that resist the targeted pests," she reported to the Collective Council. "However, they also resist beneficial organisms, require specialized nutrients that do not exist naturally, and produce fruit that is toxic to most species." "How did the human achieve different results with the same techniques?" asked Counselor Prime Nexavara. "We do not know. Her notes describe standard procedures, but something in her application of those procedures created outcomes we cannot duplicate. She seemed to understand biological systems at an intuitive level that we lack. The failure was particularly frustrating because the Nexari were themselves a bioengineered species. Their entire civilization was based on manipulating organic systems and living technology. Yet they could not match the achievements of a single human scientist working with basic equipment. More disturbing was the discovery of how extensively human influence had shaped galactic civilization. Researchers found that human contributions were woven into almost every aspect of interspecies cooperation. Dr. Yu Jin's medical protocols had prevented countless plagues. Engineer Tae Hyun's infrastructure designs allowed different atmospheric requirements to coexist, and philosopher Min Seo's ethical frameworks had shaped council law for generations. "Are not just trying to replace their technology," reported Chief Archivist Relmoth to an emergency session of the council leadership. "We are trying to replace their entire approach to thinking about problems. They saw connections and patterns that we missed completely." The archival research revealed the true scope of human integration into galactic society. Every major improvement in interspecies relations over the past 2 centuries could be traced back to human innovations. They had not just participated in the development of galactic civilization. They had guided its evolution in ways that other species had never recognized. "Look at this pattern," Relmoth continued, displaying a complex timeline on the main screen. "Every time tensions increased between species, humans would quietly introduce cultural exchange programs, joint research projects, or trade incentives that reduced conflict. They were conducting social engineering on a galactic scale. The implications were staggering. Humans had been shaping the behavior of dozens of different species for centuries, guiding them toward cooperation and away from their natural tendencies toward competition and conflict. They had done it so skillfully that no one realized it was happening. We have been their experimental subjects," said Counselor Threshcall, his warrior pride wounded by the revelation. "They have been managing us like children." "No," corrected Velthar thoughtfully. "Like gardeners. They have been cultivating our better natures while allowing us to believe we were making our own choices." The distinction was important, but not comforting. Humans had not controlled other species through force or deception, but through the gentle application of wisdom and patience. They had seen the potential for a truly galactic civilization and had worked quietly for centuries to make it possible. Now, without their guidance, that civilization was collapsing back into its component parts. Species that had worked together for generations were rediscovering old prejudices and territorial instincts. The careful balance that had maintained peace was breaking down as each group pursued its own immediate interests. A delegation of senior counselors decided to visit Earth directly, hoping that face-to-face contact might succeed where formal communications had failed. High Counselor Zenthara led the mission, accompanied by representatives from the 5 most influential species. The journey to Sol System took 3 days, and the delegation was surprised by what they found. Human space was bustling with activity. Colony ships moved between systems, research stations orbited every planet, and commercial traffic flowed in patterns of obvious prosperity and efficiency. "They are not suffering," observed Trade Representative Yiln, with a mixture of admiration and disappointment. "They are thriving." The human response to their arrival was cordial but firm. A mid-level administrator named Park Ji-ho met with them at a space station orbiting Earth. He was polite, helpful, and completely inflexible. "We appreciate your visit," he told them in perfect galactic standard. "Earth values the relationships we built during our council membership, but we are no longer available for external consultation or cooperation projects." "We need your help," Zenthera said bluntly. "Our civilizations are falling apart without human guidance." "We understand that the transition is difficult," Park replied with genuine sympathy. "Change always is. But we have confidence that the galactic community will find its own solutions to these challenges." "You do not understand," pressed Counselor Threshkal. "People are dying, worlds are starving, wars are starting." "We do understand," Park said quietly. "And we are sorry for the suffering. But Earth's position is final. We will not return to our previous role." The delegation spent 3 days on the station, meeting with various human officials and trying every argument they could think of. They offered economic incentives, military alliances, territorial concessions, and complete autonomy within the council structure. The humans listened politely to every proposal and rejected them all with the same gentle firmness. 4 months after humanity's withdrawal, the galactic economy entered its first recession in 3 centuries. The decline started slowly, almost invisibly, but gained momentum as the interconnected systems that humans had designed and maintained began to fail in cascade patterns. Economic Coordinator Veltran of the Central Banking Consortium stared at reports that made no sense according to traditional economic theory. Trade volumes were dropping despite stable demand, resource allocation was becoming increasingly inefficient, and productivity was falling across all sectors simultaneously. "The pattern defies analysis," admitted his chief economist, Dr. Kexthul. "Individual markets appear healthy, but the overall system is losing coherence. It is as if the economic framework itself is dissolving." What they were witnessing was the collapse of humanity's invisible economic architecture. For 2 centuries, human economists and systems analysts had quietly optimized trade routes, streamlined resource distribution, and created efficiency algorithms that reduced waste while maximizing prosperity. Their work had become so integrated into galactic commerce that removing it was like removing the foundation from under a building. "Look at this shipping data," Dr. Kexthul continued, displaying complex charts on the main screen. Before the human withdrawal, cargo vessels followed optimal routes that minimized fuel consumption and transit time. Now ships are using traditional point-to-point navigation, increasing costs by an average of 47%. "Can we not simply continue using the human routing systems?" asked Veltran. "We tried. The algorithms require constant updating, based on changing conditions, political situations, and economic factors. Without human oversight, they become increasingly inaccurate and eventually recommend routes that no longer exist or pass through hostile territory." The economic disruption was creating political instability as well. Species that had grown accustomed to steady prosperity were facing shortages and inflation for the first time in their living memory. The Vaxian Trade Coalition was experiencing civil unrest as their crystal-based society struggled with supply chain failures that affected their most basic technological needs. Meanwhile, the hegemony of vast stars faced a medical crisis that revealed just how dependent they had become on human expertise. A viral outbreak that should have been easily contained was spreading across multiple star systems, killing thousands and threatening to become a full pandemic. Chief Medical Officer Yarthek stood in the Emergency Response Center watching infection. Rates climb on displays that showed expanding red zones across the hegemony's territory. His medical staff was working desperately to develop treatments, but they lacked the systematic approach that Dr. Youngsik had used to contain previous outbreaks. "The virus is adapting faster than we can respond," reported senior researcher Nexfal, her voice strained with exhaustion. "We develop a treatment. It works for a few days. Then the organism mutates and becomes resistant." "How did the human prevent this?" demanded Yarthek. He used predictive modeling to anticipate viral evolution and developed treatment protocols. that stayed ahead of adaptation. His methods required understanding biological systems at multiple levels simultaneously. The hegemony scientists were discovering that Dr. Young-Sik's approach went far beyond simple medical knowledge. He had understood disease as part of larger ecological and social systems, treating not just symptoms, but the conditions that allowed illness to spread. His protocols had prevented outbreaks by addressing poverty, malnutrition, and environmental factors that most medical professionals ignored. "We are trying to cure a plague," Nexfall explained. While he prevented plagues from starting, we are reactive, he was predictive. We treat individuals. He treated entire civilizations. Without his guidance, the outbreak continued to spread, forcing the hegemony to implement quarantine measures that crippled their economy and created massive social disruption. What should have been a minor medical incident was becoming a civilization-threatening disaster. The crisis revealed something that terrified the Council leadership. Humans had not just contributed technical solutions, but had provided the philosophical framework that held galactic civilization together. Analyst Jae Hyun's writings on interspecies ethics had shaped Council law for generations, while Professor Soo Jin's educational reforms had created the first generation of truly galactic citizens. "We are reverting," Velthar admitted during a closed session of senior counselors. "Without human guidance, we are becoming what we were before, separate species pursuing separate interests with no common vision or shared values." The evidence was everywhere. The Draknari Empire had begun making territorial demands they had not voiced in 2 centuries, claiming that previous agreements were no longer valid without human mediation. The Caraxian Federation was stockpiling weapons for defensive purposes, while the Mining Guild was seizing resource-rich asteroids that had been designated as neutral territory. Ancient rivalries were resurfacing as species abandoned the cooperative principles that humans had helped establish. The Zephyrians and the Nexari, who had worked together for decades on atmospheric research, were now competing aggressively for the same resources and refusing to share data. "Look at our own behavior," continued Velthar, gesturing around the council chamber where empty seats marked the species that had already withdrawn from the organization. "We sit here arguing about procedure and precedent while our civilization collapses around us. We have become exactly what humans must have seen when they decided to leave, a collection of petty tribes incapable of meaningful cooperation." The most devastating discovery came from the Education Analysis Division. Professor Soo Jin's teaching methods had been adopted throughout the galaxy, creating educational systems that emphasized critical thinking, empathy, and cross-cultural understanding. Without ongoing development and support, those systems were failing, and the students they produced were reverting to more traditional species-centric thinking patterns. "We are losing our children," reported Education Coordinator Mel Shan in a voice heavy with despair. "The generation that grew up with human educational principles is being replaced by young people who see other species as competitors rather than colleagues." The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just influenced current galactic politics, but had been shaping the minds that would determine the future. Without their continued guidance, the next generation would be less capable of cooperation, less willing to compromise, and more likely to repeat the conflicts that had plagued the galaxy before human intervention. Intelligence reports from the border regions painted an even darker picture. 3 separate conflicts were escalating toward open warfare, and the Council's peacekeeping forces seemed helpless to prevent them. Without Commander Jin Woo's early warning systems and prevention protocols, they could only react to crises after they had already become unstoppable. "We do not know how to prevent wars," admitted Defense Coordinator Zahn during a military briefing. "Our forces are trained to fight and win conflicts, not to stop them from starting." The human approach was completely different from anything in our military doctrine. The realization was particularly bitter for the Draknari, whose entire culture was built around military prowess. They had never understood that preventing wars required different skills than winning them, and those skills were apparently beyond their ability to learn or replicate. Most disturbing of all were reports from the frontier regions where new civilizations were approaching spaceflight capability. 3 different species that would have eagerly joined the galactic community 50 years ago were now actively avoiding contact with council representatives. They had studied galactic politics and concluded that isolation was preferable to joining what appeared to be a dysfunctional and declining organization. "We are no longer an example worth following," Velthar confided to his private staff. "Young civilizations look at us and see chaos, inefficiency, and conflict. Why would they want to join something that offers them nothing but problems?" The council that had once been a beacon of hope for emerging species was becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of political cooperation. Without human guidance to demonstrate the benefits of unity, the galactic community was proving that diversity and cooperation were incompatible concepts. Research teams analyzing human space continued to report unprecedented advancement and prosperity. Free from the burden of maintaining galactic stability, human scientists were making breakthrough discoveries at an accelerating pace. Their society was evolving rapidly, developing new forms of government and social organization that seemed far more effective than anything the Council had achieved. "They are becoming post-galactic," reported Intelligence Chief Rakton. "Their civilization is advancing beyond anything we can measure or understand. They have transcended the limitations that still bind the rest of us." The reports described human colonies that operated without traditional hierarchies, research projects that solved problems through collaborative insight rather than competition, and social systems that seemed to eliminate the conflicts that plagued every other species. "While we decline, they ascend," Velthar said quietly, staring out at the stars that no longer seemed to shine with promise but with judgment. 6 months after humanity's quiet departure, the Galactic Council of 47 had become the Council of 39. 8 species had followed Earth's example, withdrawing from the organization to form smaller alliances or choose complete independence. The Great Chamber that had once buzzed with the voices of diverse civilizations now echoed with empty spaces and bitter regrets. Council Speaker Velthar stood at the central podium, preparing to deliver an address that historians would later call the Great Lament. The remaining delegates sat in scattered groups, no longer filling the vast space with the energy and purpose that had once defined galactic civilization. Many sections remained dark, their environmental systems shut down to conserve resources that were no longer flowing freely through the collapsed economic networks. "Fellow delegates," Velthar began, his voice carrying clearly through translation, systems that still function despite constant breakdowns. "Today marks 6 months since our civilization began its transformation. I will not call it a decline, because that would suggest we once possessed something worthy that has since been lost. The truth is more painful. We never possessed the greatness we thought we had." The chamber was silent except for the hum of life support systems. Even the most aggressive species seemed subdued by the weight of recent events. The proud Draknari warriors sat quietly in their environmental suits, their territorial ambitions forgotten in the face of larger concerns. The innovative Kalorians had ceased their technological demonstrations, their confidence shattered by repeated failures to replicate human achievements. "We believed ourselves to be the pinnacle of galactic evolution," Velthar continued. 47 different species working together in harmony, sharing knowledge and resources for the betterment of all. We congratulated ourselves on our wisdom, our cooperation, our advanced civilization. But we were wrong. Reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of accelerating collapse. The Caraxian Federation was facing widespread famine as their agricultural systems continued to fail without Dr. So Young's innovations. The Vaxian Trade Coalition had descended into civil conflict as different crystal-based factions fought over dwindling resources. The Mining Guild had seized 12 asteroid fields in disputed territory, provoking military responses from 3 different species. "We were not a partnership of equals," Velthar admitted, the words bitter in his mouth. "We were children being guided by patient adults who never demanded recognition for their efforts. The humans were not members of our council. They were its conscience, its wisdom, its moral foundation. Without them, we have revealed ourselves to be exactly what we always were, primitive tribes squabbling over territory and resources." The admission sent ripples of discomfort through the assembled delegates. For species that prided themselves on their advanced evolution and sophisticated cultures, the truth was deeply humiliating. They had not achieved galactic civilization through their own efforts, but had been gently guided toward it by humans who asked for nothing in return except basic courtesy and cooperation. Intelligence reports from human space continued to arrive with increasing frequency, each one more remarkable than the last. Human colonies were achieving breakthrough discoveries in physics, medicine, and social organization at an unprecedented pace. Free from the burden of maintaining galactic stability, they were advancing their own civilization at speeds that defied comprehension. "While we stagnate and decline," Velthar read from the latest reports, "humanity continues to evolve. Their research stations are making discoveries that revolutionize our understanding of the universe. Their social experiments are creating new forms of government that eliminate the conflicts we consider inevitable. Their exploratory missions are mapping regions of space we never dreamed of reaching." The reports described human achievements that seemed almost magical to species still struggling with basic cooperation. Human scientists had developed faster-than-light communication that operated on principles the Council's best physicists could not understand. Human sociologists had created community structures that eliminated crime, poverty, and social conflict without sacrificing individual freedom. Human explorers were establishing colonies in hostile environments that should have been impossible to inhabit. "They have become what we pretended to be," Velthar observed. "A truly advanced civilization capable of transcending the limitations that still bind us to patterns of competition and conflict." The most painful realization was that humanity had been held back by their council membership, not advanced by it. Their moral obligation to solve everyone else's problems had prevented them from fully exploring their own potential. Once freed from that burden, they had immediately begun achievements that dwarfed anything the galactic community had ever accomplished. "We did not lose our greatest members," Velthar said quietly. "We revealed that we were never worthy of them in the first place." The chamber remained silent as delegates processed the full implications of their situation. They were not just witnessing the end of galactic civilization, but discovering that it had never truly existed. What they had mistaken for advanced cooperation was actually benevolent management by a species that had outgrown the need for their primitive political structures. New civilizations approaching spaceflight capability were confirming this assessment through their actions. 5 different species had achieved interstellar travel in recent months, and all had chosen isolation rather than contact with the Council. They studied galactic politics from a distance and concluded that the supposed benefits of membership were outweighed by the obvious dysfunction and decline. "We have become a cautionary tale," Velthar admitted. "Young civilizations look at our squabbling, our inefficiency, our conflicts, and choose to develop independently rather than join what appears to be a failing experiment in cooperation." The economic recession had deepened into something approaching economic collapse. Without human coordination, trade routes had become inefficient, resource allocation had broken down, and productivity was falling across all member territories. Species that had grown accustomed to prosperity were facing shortages and inflation that their governments seemed powerless to address. Medical crises were spreading across multiple systems as species struggled to replicate Dr. Youngsik's prevention protocols. What should have been minor outbreaks were becoming major plagues, killing thousands and overwhelming medical systems that had grown dependent on human expertise. The hegemony of vast stars was under complete quarantine, their civilization paralyzed by a pandemic that continued to spread despite desperate efforts to contain it. "Our technological capabilities are declining," reported Chief Science Advisor Nalthek during the emergency briefing that preceded Velthar's address. "Without human innovation and maintenance, our most advanced systems are failing. We can repair them temporarily, but we cannot improve them or adapt them to changing conditions." The revelation that galactic technology had stagnated was particularly devastating to species that prided themselves on scientific advancement. The Calorians, who considered themselves the galaxy's premier engineers, were struggling to maintain equipment they had used routinely for decades. The Nexari, masters of biological technology, were watching their living systems die without understanding how to heal them. "We have been living off human innovations for 2 centuries, Nalthek continued. "Every major advancement in medicine, engineering, agriculture, and social organization can be traced back to human research. We thought we were contributing to galactic science, but we were actually just applying human discoveries to our own specific needs." As Velthar prepared to conclude his address, a communications signal arrived from an unexpected source. The message originated from human space, but it was not from any official government channel. Instead, it came from a group calling itself the Independent Species Alliance, 5 civilizations that had quietly withdrawn from council membership and were now working directly with humanity on voluntary cooperation projects. "To our former colleagues in the Galactic Council," the message began, delivered by a Zephyrian delegate named Kelvorth, who had disappeared 3 months earlier. "We write to inform you that alternatives to your current political structure do exist. Humanity has developed new frameworks for cooperation that eliminate the conflicts and inefficiencies that plague traditional galactic politics." The message described voluntary association networks where species cooperated on specific projects without surrendering sovereignty or submitting to central authority. Each civilization maintained complete independence while contributing their unique capabilities to collaborative efforts that benefited all participants. "We have discovered that true cooperation requires equality, not hierarchy," Kelvorth continued. "Humanity does not lead this alliance, they participate in it. Decisions are made through consensus rather than political maneuvering. Resources are shared based on need rather than power." The description painted a picture of everything the Council had tried to achieve but never managed to accomplish. The Independent Species Alliance operated without the bureaucracy, politics, and territorial conflicts that paralyzed traditional galactic government.